I want to tell you a story that took me years to accept and even longer to say out loud. It is a story about family, about the quiet spaces where love should live, and about the shadows that grow when we stop paying attention. It is about my son and the woman he married, and how, somewhere along the way, I lost him without even knowing it. I still remember the night everything broke open. It was quiet. Too quiet, if I am being honest. The kind of quiet that hangs in the room like a held breath, waiting for something to fall apart. I sat in my living room alone, the lamp dim, the house half asleep. My hands were wrapped around a mug of warm tea I never drank. I kept staring at my phone, as if somehow it would ring if I just looked long enough. But it didn't. It hadn't for a long time. My son, Daniel, used to call me every day, sometimes about something important, sometimes about nothing at all. He used to talk with excitement in his voice. He would laugh with that deep, boyish laugh I knew since the day he first learned to speak. He would ask for advice. He would tell me stories about work. He would ask me if I had eaten, even though I was the one who raised him to think about those things. But slowly, little by little, without any warning or explanation, the calls became fewer, shorter, colder, until one day they stopped. At first, I didn't want to believe it was intentional. We all get busy. Life moves fast. Marriage brings new priorities. I told myself that. I repeated it like a prayer, like something I needed to keep myself from feeling the truth. But some part of me, a quiet, aching part, knew something else was happening. It started the moment he married Emma. I had nothing against her in the beginning. She was polite, soft-spoken, a little distant, maybe, but I convinced myself that people open up in their own time, and I was willing to wait. She was part of my son's world now, so I welcomed her with the same love I had for him. Or at least, I tried to. But as time passed, I started to notice small things. Little changes. Moments that didn't make sense at first. Moments that I brushed off because I wanted to be better than suspicion. Because I trusted my son. Because I believed family ties couldn't be so easily undone. But I was wrong. I remember the first time she ever spoke to me in a tone that felt like a warning. It was a small comment, nothing you would call rude. But the edge of it lingered. Daniel should really focus on his new life now, she had said, smiling just enough that I wasn't sure if I imagined the bitterness beneath the words. A man can't stay tied to his parents forever. I laughed it off at the time. I told her, of course, I understood. I raised him to be independent. But I also believed independence didn't mean disconnection. I believed a son could have a marriage and still have a father. I didn't see the door she was beginning to close. But looking back now, I think that was the first crack. The first hint of the distance that would grow between us. A distance she would feed silently, carefully, and with a calmness that felt almost strategic. Still, I didn't blame her. Why would I? I thought she simply wanted space. I thought she wanted to build her own home with her husband. Those are natural things. Expected, even. But slowly, things went beyond that. Little interactions started to feel tense. A small hesitation before she greeted me. A strange look when I tried to help. A gentle but firm push when I tried to offer advice, even when I wasn't offering any. I noticed Daniel started repeating phrases that didn't sound like him. Words that felt planted. Thoughts that didn't belong to him. Dad, I'm busy. Dad, you worry too much. Dad, you don't need to call every day. Dad, we're trying to build our own routine. Every sentence ended with Dad, but none of them felt like they came from my son's heart. Still, I swallowed the feeling. Because love makes us patient. And fear of losing someone makes us quiet. But even patience has limits. Even quiet hearts break. One day, after weeks of silence, I called him just to hear his voice. Just to feel like a father again, even for a moment. He answered, sounding tired. Not physically tired, emotionally tired. The kind of tired that tells you your presence is no longer welcome. Dad, I can't talk long, he said. I told him I understood. I always tried to understand. Even when it hurt. But right before he hung up, I heard something in the background. A voice. A whisper. A tone sharp and annoyed. Why is he calling again? It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for me. But it pierced through the phone like a blade. Like a truth I didn't want to face. That was the moment I realized my son wasn't pulling away on his own. He was being pulled. He was being guided. Redirected. Influenced. He was becoming a man I didn't recognize. A man I didn't raise. A man who looked at me as if I were a burden. But even then, I held on. I told myself families go through phases. I told myself marriages need adjustment. I told myself maybe I really was calling too much, even though my heart whispered otherwise. But the night everything truly changed, the night everything came out, was a night I will never forget. It was late. I was sitting alone again, staring at my silent phone again, wondering what I had done to make my own child keep his distance. I wondered if maybe I hadn't been a good father, if I had been too strict, if I had worked too much when he was young, if I had missed something important along the way. Regret is a quiet companion. It sits beside you, invisible but heavy. It whispers old memories. It turns small doubts into storms. My chest felt tight that night, not from anger, but from sadness, a deep sadness that comes from watching someone you love slip away one day at a time. Then, just as I was about to turn off the lamp and go to bed, there was a knock on my door. Soft, almost cautious, like someone wasn't sure they should be there. I didn't expect anyone. No one visited me that late. When I opened the door, my son was standing there. But he didn't look like my son, not the boy I raised, not the man I supported. He looked tired, conflicted, like someone who had been carrying too much for too long. And he wasn't alone. Emma stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes cold, jaw tight. The air around them felt tense, like they had just ended an argument and brought the leftover pieces to my doorstep. "Dad, we need to talk," my son said. Those words, those 4 simple words, they never mean anything good. Not when said with that tone. Not when said at your front door late at night. I stepped aside and let them in. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew it wouldn't be anything easy. They sat on the couch. I sat across from them, trying to read my son's face, trying to find the boy I remembered inside the man sitting before me. What happened next? What they told me, what came out that night, was something I never imagined, and it changed everything. But before I tell you what they said, before I tell you what truth finally broke open, I need you to understand something. Sometimes a family doesn't fall apart all at once. Sometimes it breaks slowly, one misunderstanding at a time, one unspoken word at a time, one influence at a time. And sometimes, you don't realize how far you've fallen from someone you love, until you're sitting across from them, watching them speak to you like a stranger. That was the moment I felt it. The distance, the loss, the ache of a father who no longer recognized his own child. And as I sat there, waiting for them to speak, I realized this was not just a conversation. This was the moment everything would change. My living room felt different that night. The familiar walls, the dim lamp, the warm, worn-out furniture. Everything seemed to shrink around us as the 3 of us sat there. No one spoke at first. The silence felt thick, almost heavy, like it had been waiting for this moment longer than any of us had. Daniel sat on the couch with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, staring down at the floor. He wasn't the confident man I knew. He wasn't the boy who used to run into my arms after school. He wasn't the young adult who called me about every small victory in his life. He was someone caught between 2 worlds, and I didn't know which part of him I still belonged to. Emma sat beside him, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She crossed her legs slowly, as if she was preparing for a formal meeting rather than a conversation with her husband's father. Her eyes scanned the room like she was forcing herself to be here. Every detail seemed to annoy her. The soft hum of the old refrigerator, the uneven painting on the wall, the stack of newspapers at the edge of the coffee table. She took it all in with a kind of quiet disapproval. My son finally lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were tired. Not tired from the day, tired from something deeper, from something that had been building for months. "Dad," he began, voice soft. "We didn't want to come this late. But something happened tonight." I nodded once, though my throat felt tight. "I'm glad you're here," I said quietly. And I meant it, even though some part of me feared what was coming next. Emma shifted slightly, letting out a slow breath through her nose. It wasn't loud, but it carried a message. Let's get this over with. I folded my hands in my lap and kept my eyes on my son. He was the one I raised. He was the one who owed me the truth. Whatever that truth was. Daniel took another breath, steadying himself. Then he spoke. "Dad, Emma thinks you don't like her." The words hung in the air, strange and unexpected, like something dropped into a pool of still water, disrupting everything. I blinked slowly, trying to understand. "What?" I asked gently. It wasn't a disbelief out of anger. It was disbelief out of confusion. Emma's eyes narrowed slightly at my reaction, as if she expected me to deny it, as if she had prepared for a confrontation. Daniel continued, voice quieter now. She feels. He paused, searching for the right words. She feels unwelcome. She says your behavior has made her uncomfortable. I looked at her. She didn't flinch, but she also didn't soften. Her expression remained composed, distant, almost rehearsed. I kept my tone calm. I've never said anything to make you feel unwelcome, I said slowly, choosing every word with care. Emma finally spoke. Her voice was calm, smooth, almost controlled. It's not what you say, she replied. It's how you act. I waited. If there was something I had done wrong, I genuinely wanted to hear it. But what she said next felt like a twist of something I never felt inside myself. You always look at me like you're judging me, she said. You make comments, little things, like you're not happy Daniel married me. My mouth opened slightly in surprise. I searched my memory, every interaction, every moment. I had been nothing but polite. Sometimes a little reserved, yes, but never judgmental, never unkind. Daniel rubbed his forehead. She says it's been going on for months, he murmured. And she says that's why she doesn't feel comfortable visiting. It felt like a knife sliding slowly between ribs. Not because of the accusation itself, but because my son believed it enough to sit here tonight. Daniel, I said softly, when have I ever? Emma cut me off gently but firmly. It's not something you notice, I'm sure. It's subtle, but I feel it. Her voice carried a calm certainty, the kind someone uses when they want their version of the story to become the truth. Daniel leaned back on the couch, exhaling heavily. Dad, we don't want drama. We don't want conflict. We just want peace. I nodded slowly. I want that too. But inside, something in me was starting to tremble. Not out of anger, out of grief. Because I was beginning to understand what had been happening all along. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't miscommunication. This wasn't an accidental distancing. This was influence, pressure, manipulation. And my son was caught in it like a fish tangled in a net he didn't see. Emma folded her hands neatly in her lap. I think Daniel needs to set boundaries, she said calmly, for his own emotional well-being. Boundaries. The word felt like a hammer. Daniel nodded, not fully meeting my eyes. Yeah, boundaries, he echoed softly. I felt myself sink a little deeper into the chair. What kind of boundaries? I asked quietly. Another pause. Another breath from both of them. And then she answered for him. For now, less frequent calls. Less involvement. Less pressure. Pressure. She said it like I was suffocating him. Like my love was a weight he couldn't carry. Daniel looked apologetic, but also trapped. It's just for a while, he said. We're trying to build our own life. Our own space. I nodded slowly, though the ache in my chest felt heavy, like someone had placed a stone on my heart. I understand you want your own life, I whispered. I understand you need space. I paused, but I didn't know loving my son was something I had to step away from. Daniel swallowed hard. Emma looked away for a moment. I'm not. I stopped myself. I breathed. Then I continued. I'm not trying to control your life. I'm not trying to be in the way. I looked at my son directly. I just miss you. The room grew quiet. But it wasn't a gentle quiet anymore. It was tight, tense, almost uncomfortable. Emma's expression didn't soften. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at Daniel, not at me. I realized then. She had come here not to express her feelings. She had come here to enforce something. To finalize something already brewing. To make distance official. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees again, hands clasped. Dad, he said softly, I'm not cutting you out. I'm not. I just need you to understand that things are different now. I forced a small nod. I know they are. But, he continued, voice trembling slightly, Emma is my wife. And her comfort matters. If she feels uncomfortable, I need to support her. Of course he did. He was a good husband. I raised him to be one. But it didn't mean the situation hurt any less. I wanted to tell him that Emma's discomfort came from her own perception, not from anything I'd done. I wanted to tell him I'd always respected their marriage. I wanted to tell him his distance felt like losing him piece by piece. But I stayed quiet. Because sometimes silence is the only dignity you have left. Emma looked at the clock. We should go, she said quietly to Daniel. We've said what we needed to say. Daniel nodded slowly. He stood up first, then reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation. I stood up too, but my legs felt unsteady. Like the ground beneath me had shifted in a way I wasn't prepared for. They walked toward the door. Daniel paused before opening it. Dad, I love you, he whispered. The words were soft, almost fragile. But something was missing in them. The warmth, the certainty, the closeness we once had. "I love you too," I replied. And I meant it. More than anything. Emma didn't look back. Not once. She just stepped out into the hallway, her hand still in his. As they walked to their car, I stood by the window, watching. My living room felt too quiet again. Too empty. Like the conversation had taken something from it. Something I couldn't get back. Daniel opened the car door for her. She slid in. He walked around to the driver's side, his shoulders slumped in a way that made my heart twist. When the car pulled away, its headlights sweeping across my driveway, I felt a pain I hadn't felt since the day I buried my own father. A sense of finality. A sense of loss. Not a loss from death, but a loss from separation. From slow distance. From influence that crept like shadows. I sat down again, staring at the empty couch where they had just sat. And I wondered, for the first time in my life, what if my son no longer saw me as his home? After Daniel and Emma drove away that night, the silence in my house didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like something physical, something sitting in the room with me, something heavy enough to bend the air. I sat there for a long time, staring at the front door like I expected it to open again. Like Daniel might walk back inside alone, sit down across from me, and say, "Dad, I didn't mean any of that. I'm sorry." I kept imagining that moment over and over, like replaying a scene from a life that no longer existed. But the door stayed closed, and the truth crept in slowly, the way cold moves through an empty room. My son had left, but something deeper had left long before that night. It took me years to understand that distance doesn't happen with a single moment. It builds quietly, softly, so softly that you don't even realize something is breaking until the pieces lie at your feet. I walked to the kitchen, made myself another cup of tea, and sat by the small round table I had eaten breakfast at every morning since my wife passed. I watched the steam rise from the cup, curling in gentle patterns that looked almost fragile. I didn't drink it. I just held it in my hands, letting the warmth seep into my skin even while the rest of me felt cold. There's a certain ache that settles in a father's heart when he feels forgotten. It's not sharp. It's not loud. It's soft but deep. A quiet kind of pain that feels like a bruise you keep pressing without meaning to. I kept listening to the house, expecting to hear Daniel's footsteps the way I once did when he was young, running down the hallway for breakfast. But the house stayed still. Still enough to remind me that memories don't fill empty rooms. I thought about calling him again, just to hear his voice, just to feel like things hadn't completely changed. But I knew calling would only make things worse. He would see it as pressure. He would think I wasn't respecting the boundaries. Even the word felt strange, as if love needed borders, as if a father had to ask permission to care. I sat there until the tea went cold. My hands felt empty again when I set the cup down. For the first time in a long while, I felt something I didn't want to admit. I felt alone. Not just lonely, alone. As though the bridge between me and my son had quietly been burned while I wasn't looking. And I didn't know how to rebuild it. The days that followed were quieter than usual. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world had shrunk a little smaller. Daniel didn't call. Not even once. I waited a day. Then another. Then a week. I told myself he was busy. I told myself he was adjusting. I told myself he was respecting the space we had talked about. But deep down, I knew this wasn't space. This was distance. Distance with roots. I tried to keep myself busy. I fixed an old drawer in the kitchen. I cleaned the shed behind the house. I organized my tools even though they didn't need organizing. But no matter what I did, my mind kept drifting back to Daniel's face that night. That tired, conflicted expression that didn't look like the son I knew. There's a certain look a parent recognizes instantly, even when they pretend not to. It's the look of someone carrying someone else's words, someone else's thoughts, someone else's anger. And I realized something painful. He wasn't just distancing himself from me. He was defending someone else from me. Someone who had painted me as a threat. Someone who had whispered that I was a burden. Someone who needed him completely. I had been replaced. Not out of malice. Not out of anything I had done. But out of influence that grew quietly behind closed doors. And I didn't know how to reach him through it. A few weeks later, something happened that confirmed my fears. It was a Saturday morning. I stepped outside to water the small garden I kept near the porch. I liked taking care of those plants. They didn't need much. Just a little light, a little patience, and a gentle hand. As I was watering them, I heard the sound of a familiar engine. Daniel's car. My heart lifted, just a little. Not too much. I had learned not to expect anything anymore, but enough to make my breath catch. The car pulled up to the curb. Daniel stepped out. But he wasn't alone. Emma sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, arms crossed, not looking at me. Daniel walked toward me, but his pace was slow, uncertain. I turned off the hose and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Hey," I said softly, forcing a small smile. "Hey, Dad," he replied. It had been weeks, but he didn't hug me. He didn't reach out. He just stood there, hands in his pockets. "We were in the area," he said, "so we thought we'd stop by." Emma didn't get out of the car. I looked at her for a moment. She stared straight ahead, as if stepping foot on my property might burn her. "Would you like to come inside?" I asked. Daniel looked back at the car, then shook his head. "No, we can't stay long." I nodded slowly, even though something inside me felt a small crack. Daniel shifted his weight. "Dad, I wanted to talk about something." I waited. I didn't push. I didn't ask. I just listened. He cleared his throat. "Emma and we've decided we're going to spend holidays with her family this year." I felt my stomach drop. Not because of the decision itself. Families alternate holidays all the time. But because of how he said it. Carefully. Nervously. As if I might explode. As if he feared my reaction. As if he had been warned about how I might respond. I kept my voice calm. Quiet. Soft. "That's okay," I said. "You should do what feels right for you." He seemed surprised that I wasn't upset. He even relaxed a little. But he didn't smile. He hesitated again. "There's more." I stayed silent, but my heart was beating hard. "We're also planning to cut back on visits. Not forever, just for now." Behind him, through the car window, I saw Emma's lips curve just slightly. Not into a smile, but into something that looked like satisfaction. I lowered my gaze. I nodded once. "All right," I whispered. He exhaled, relieved. But the relief hurt more than the words. Because he wasn't relieved that I understood. He was relieved that I didn't resist. Relieved that he wouldn't have to defend her tonight. I raised my eyes again, meeting his. "I hope you're both happy," I said softly. "I really do." Daniel looked at me as if trying to figure out whether I meant it. I did. Even when it hurt, I did. He stepped back toward the car. He wasn't staying. He had delivered his message. That was all. I walked him to the driver's side door. "Take care of yourself," I said quietly. "You too, Dad." He opened the door. But before getting in, he paused. "Dad?" he said gently. "Yes." He hesitated. "Try not to overthink all of this. It's nothing personal." I nodded slowly. "I know," I whispered. He slid into the car, closed the door, and started the engine. Emma didn't look at me. Not even once. As the car pulled away, the exhaust left a faint gray trail behind it. I stood on the lawn long after they were gone, listening to the fading sound of the engine until it disappeared completely. And as the silence returned, deeper than before, I realized something painful. I wasn't losing my son. I had already lost him. Bit by bit. Quietly. Softly. A little more every day. And I didn't know if he even noticed. I didn't know if he cared. I didn't know if he remembered who I used to be in his life. All I knew was this. The line between us had grown so thin, I was afraid that one day soon, it would snap completely. And I had no idea how to stop it. I remember sitting alone in my living room that evening, long after everyone else had gone to bed. The house felt too quiet, almost hollow, as if the walls were holding their breath. I stared at my hands for a long time. They looked older than I remembered, more tired, more worn. And I caught myself wondering when exactly life had slipped into this strange distance between me and my own son. I used to think I was a good father. Maybe not perfect, but steady, reliable. A man my boy could always come to. A man he trusted. But now, with the way things were unfolding, I started to question everything. I wondered if I had missed something important. If there had been signs I should have noticed. If the change had started long before my daughter-in-law came into the picture, and I had simply been too caught up in my routines to see it. But then again, maybe I was blaming myself because it was easier than facing the truth. That truth was simple and painful. My son didn't trust me anymore. Or at least, that's how it felt. I leaned back on the couch and closed my eyes. I tried to replay the conversations we used to have. The laughter. The times he would sit beside me without any hesitation, sharing his fears or his dreams like it was the most natural thing in the world. I missed that boy. I missed the way he used to look at me. Not with suspicion. Not with doubt. Not with that quiet distance he seemed to carry now. And every time I tried to speak with him in recent months, there was always this invisible wall. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, cold, subtle, like he was always choosing silence over explanation, like he was always guarding something, or guarding someone. And deep down, I knew who. I'm not saying she was a bad person, at least not at first. When my son brought her home for the first time, she was polite, soft-spoken, almost shy. She held his arm tightly like he was her anchor, and he looked at her like she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. How could I not welcome her? How could I not be happy for him? But over time, something shifted. Little comments, little hints, little moments where she would twist a story or retell an event with details that didn't match reality. There was a kind of smoothness to the way she talked, a calm confidence that made it hard to challenge her. If she said something, it sounded final, absolute. My son seemed to echo whatever she said, almost without thinking, and I found myself stepping back more and more, unsure where my place even was. That night, sitting alone, I felt the weight of all of it pressing on me. I rubbed my forehead and let out a long breath. I wasn't angry. That wasn't the feeling. It was more like quiet sadness, a slow ache I couldn't push away. I wondered if this was what aging felt like, watching the people you love most drift away while you try to hold on to something that no longer fits into your hands. I thought about calling him, just to hear his voice, just to tell him I loved him. But I didn't want to sound needy. I didn't want to chase him in a way that would make him uncomfortable. I didn't want to become one of those fathers who demanded space instead of offering it. So I stayed quiet. But silence can be heavy too. Sometimes even heavier than words. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. The floor felt cold beneath my feet. The refrigerator hummed softly. And I stood there, staring out the small window above the sink, watching the faint glow of passing car headlights reflect against the night. That's when a thought settled into me, slow and steady. Something was not right, and I could feel it in my bones. I didn't know what it was yet. I didn't know what waited ahead. But something in my son's voice, in his posture, in the way he had been avoiding long conversations, it all pointed to something deeper, something hidden. A quiet truth waiting to come out. And although I didn't know it at the time, that truth would reveal itself sooner than I expected. And when it did, it would shake the entire house. It would change everything. The following weeks were the hardest I've ever spent. Every day felt like walking on thin ice, never sure when it would break beneath me. Daniel and Emma's visits grew fewer and shorter. Every phone call I made was met with hesitation, brief answers, or polite excuses. Even simple conversations, like asking if he had eaten or how his day went, were turned into lessons about boundaries or independence. I tried to remind myself that this was part of adulthood, part of marriage, part of life. But deep down, I knew this was different. I began noticing subtle changes in my own behavior. I stopped asking questions. I stopped bringing up shared memories. I stopped sending messages unless necessary. I tried to give him space, as they had asked, but space turned into silence, and silence felt unbearable. One morning, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my mind. The air was crisp, the kind of early autumn chill that makes your chest feel alive, yet lonely at the same time. I passed houses where families were laughing, waving, living. I remembered Daniel as a boy, running ahead on the sidewalk, his small hand reaching for mine, insisting I catch him when he pretended to stumble. I missed that hand. I missed that laughter. I reached the small park at the end of the street and sat on a bench, watching leaves fall slowly to the ground. For a moment, I let myself remember. I let myself grieve, not just for the distance growing between me and Daniel, but for the truth I suspected, that it wasn't just distance. There was something actively driving us apart, and it wasn't Daniel's doing. I remembered the first time I saw it, a faint whisper of influence, a comment Emma had made about me in front of Daniel, subtle enough that it could be dismissed, yet potent enough that my son repeated it later, almost word for word. I realized then that she was shaping his perception of me, slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly, and I was powerless to stop it. That thought cut deeper than anything else. I tried to understand her perspective. I tried to find the humanity in it. Perhaps she had her reasons. Perhaps she truly believed she was protecting him from me. Perhaps she felt I was interfering. Perhaps she thought she was doing what was best for their marriage. But the effect was the same, a wedge between me and my son. A wedge that grew with every passing day. And then came the night I could no longer pretend. It was late. I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't let me. I thought of Daniel, of his voice, of the way he had avoided me. I thought of Emma, of her calm, measured expressions that always carried authority. And I realized something. If I didn't confront this, if I didn't find a way to reach him, I might lose my son forever. I picked up the phone and hesitated. The number felt strange in my hand. I pressed call, my heart pounding, and when he answered, his voice was careful, controlled, polite. "Hi, Dad," he said. "Hi, Daniel," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk?" There was a long pause. I could almost hear him weighing his words, measuring them like he always did now. "I guess," he finally said. I swallowed hard. I knew the conversation wouldn't be easy. I knew it would involve words I had avoided for months. But I needed to hear the truth. I needed him to hear me, to know that nothing I had done had been intended to hurt him. And slowly, painfully, the truth started to come out. He spoke of the subtle ways Emma had made him question me, of the things she had said, the tone she used, the stories she retold about our family. He admitted that at first he hadn't realized it, but over time, he had started to believe some of it. He had started to doubt me. He had started to see me as someone separate, almost irrelevant. And with each word, my heart broke. Not because of what he said about me, but because I could hear the confusion, the conflict, the pain in his own voice. My son had been caught in the middle. He wasn't betraying me. He was being influenced. He was protecting someone he loved. And in doing so, he had become someone I barely recognized. I tried to reassure him. I tried to tell him I loved him, that I had never judged him, that nothing had changed between us except for circumstances. I told him I understood he wanted his own life, that he had his marriage, and that I respected that. But I also told him, softly, quietly, that I hoped he wouldn't forget the bond we shared, the years we spent together, the trust and love that had always been at the heart of our relationship. By the time we hung up, it was almost dawn. The sky was pale, soft with the first light of morning. I sat on the edge of my bed, exhausted and emotionally drained, but also strangely hopeful. I had spoken. I had been honest. And maybe, just maybe, my son would find his way back to me in his own time. I realized then that love isn't always loud. Sometimes, love is patient. Sometimes, love waits quietly, even when it feels like everything is slipping away. Sometimes, love is simply being there, steady and unwavering, even when the world conspires to pull people apart. That morning, I didn't know what the next months would bring. I didn't know if Daniel and I could rebuild the closeness we had once shared. I didn't know if Emma's influence would continue to grow or if she would soften. But I knew one thing. I wasn't giving up. I would continue to show my son that I loved him. I would continue to be the father he needed, even from a distance. And I would wait for the day when he could see the truth for himself. Because family is never really lost. Not entirely. Not if you hold on with patience and honesty. And that, I realized, was the lesson I had been learning, the quiet, painful, beautiful lesson that life sometimes gives you too late. The weeks that followed were a mixture of quiet hope and relentless ache. I tried to reach out to Daniel more gently, sending short messages, small reminders that I was there. Sometimes he responded with warmth, sometimes with distance. I learned to read the pauses in his words, the spaces between the sentences. Those silences carried as much meaning as anything he ever said. I kept thinking back to the little moments from his childhood. The evenings we spent building model airplanes, the times he cried when he scraped his knee, the way he would sit on my lap and whisper secrets about school or friends. Those memories were sharp and painful now because they felt like evidence of what had been lost. I could almost touch the boy he had been, but the man he had become seemed to be slipping further from me every day. I started keeping a journal again, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote down my thoughts, my fears, my memories of Daniel, and the small victories when he would call or send a message. Writing helped me process the pain. It helped me understand that love sometimes exists quietly in the spaces we cannot reach, in the silences we cannot fill. One evening, I decided to go through some old photographs. I found pictures of Daniel as a boy, holding his first trophy, blowing out birthday candles, smiling for the camera. I remembered the way he used to giggle when I pretended to be a superhero, running through the living room with a towel as a cape. I remembered the warmth of our home, the way laughter filled every corner, the way life felt full even in its simplest moments. I sat with the photos for hours, letting memories wash over me. I could feel the ache in my chest, but it was also comforting. Memories reminded me that I had been a part of his life, that no one could take away the years we shared, the bond that had formed in those quiet, everyday moments. Then came another visit. It was unexpected, almost accidental. Daniel and Emma appeared at the doorstep one late afternoon. This time, Emma smiled, softly, almost naturally. Daniel's face carried that same tension, but there was a spark of something familiar. Perhaps relief, perhaps guilt, I wasn't sure. They came inside, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of normalcy. We didn't speak about boundaries or influence. We just sat together, drinking tea, letting the quiet fill the space without pressure. I watched my son as he spoke, trying to measure if he had changed. I realized he hadn't completely lost himself. He was still the boy who loved small joys, who remembered shared stories, who smiled at moments of tenderness. He had simply been caught in someone else's version of reality. We talked that evening about simple things: work, the garden, a book I had been reading. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't confrontational. But every word felt like a bridge, small but sturdy, being rebuilt between us. Emma watched silently, occasionally glancing at Daniel with an expression that seemed uncertain. I wondered if she realized that her influence had shifted something vital between father and son. As they left, Daniel gave me a long look. "Thanks for tonight, Dad," he said. And for the first time in months, I felt that warmth returning in his eyes, the same warmth he had held as a boy when he would run into my arms. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I knew the road ahead would still be difficult. There would still be tension, misunderstandings, and moments of distance. But that night gave me hope. It reminded me that even when shadows loom over family, love and patience can guide us back. I realized something crucial. The real challenge wasn't about asserting authority or proving points. It was about quietly, consistently showing love. About being patient, even when it hurt. About allowing the bond to mend naturally, without forcing it. I looked out the window at the fading sunlight, the shadows stretching across the garden. Life is fragile, I thought. Relationships are fragile. But love, genuine love, is resilient. It survives the influence, the misunderstandings, the silence. And sometimes, it comes back in small moments, when we least expect it, like a quiet dawn after a long, cold night. That night, as I sat alone, I felt a sense of peace, tempered with the ache of what had been lost. I understood that some lessons are learned only through patience and endurance. That family is not only about presence, but about consistent love and understanding. And that even when the world seems to conspire against connection, a bond built over years cannot be erased so easily. I whispered to myself, softly, almost as a promise. "I'll wait. I'll be here. I'll never stop being your father." And somewhere deep inside, I believed he could hear me. Over the following months, the distance slowly began to change. Not completely, not overnight, but the tension that had once filled every interaction started to soften. I could see it in Daniel's posture when he spoke to me, in the way he would linger for a moment longer during visits, instead of rushing away, in the small smiles that appeared when he recalled a shared memory. I realized that healing doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens quietly, in small moments that accumulate over time. The patience I had cultivated, the love I had held on to even in silence, was beginning to bear fruit. One evening, I found myself alone in the living room, staring at a family photo from years ago. Daniel, smiling with his first baseball glove in hand. My late wife, laughing as she helped him tie his shoelaces. I traced the faces gently with my finger, remembering the joy, the care, the warmth. I felt a lump in my throat. I had allowed distance to grow between us. Yes, but I had never stopped caring. And that love, I realized, was still strong enough to reach him, even if slowly. It was during one of those rare afternoons, when Daniel came over unannounced, that I saw the first real sign of change. He walked through the door with Emma by his side, but this time, her demeanor was softer. She greeted me politely, but her eyes didn't carry the cold edge I had once felt. Daniel gave me a look that I will never forget, quiet, steady, full of something like recognition. We spent the afternoon talking about trivial things. Work, old neighbors, the small repairs I had made around the house. And yet, each sentence, each glance, carried a weight of unspoken meaning. We were rediscovering each other, slowly, piece by piece. At one point, Daniel paused and looked down at his hands, as if collecting courage. "Dad," he said quietly, I think I understand now." I didn't interrupt. I waited, listening. "I've been distant," he continued. "Not because I don't love you, or because I want to push you away. But I let myself be influenced in ways I didn't realize. And I didn't want to admit it to myself." My chest tightened. Every word confirmed what I had feared, and yet, hearing him say it aloud made the weight lift just slightly. "I know now," he added, "that some of it wasn't true. That I didn't need to see you as a threat. That you were always my father, always there for me. And he paused again, voice trembling, "I'm sorry." I reached across the table and put my hand on his. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a lifetime of love, regret, and hope. "Daniel," I said softly, "there's nothing to apologize for. You were trying to protect yourself. I understand. And I forgive you. Always." He looked up at me, eyes glistening. A small smile broke through. And in that moment, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in months. A spark of connection that reminded me of the boy who had once run into my arms without hesitation. Emma watched quietly, but I noticed a small nod. She, too, seemed to acknowledge that something had shifted. The influence that had kept us apart was no longer as strong. The truth, finally, had begun to surface. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the living room. I reflected on the journey we had taken. The misunderstandings, the distance, the influence, the pain. It had all brought us to this moment of fragile understanding. I realized that family is not about perfection. It is about persistence, patience, and unwavering love. It is about holding on, even when the bonds feel fragile. I whispered quietly to the empty room, "We will heal. Slowly, but we will heal." And for the first time in months, the silence in my house felt gentle, not heavy. I understood that love doesn't always prevent distance, but it can guide people back to each other. And sometimes, the most powerful gestures are not dramatic confessions or confrontations, but the quiet consistency of being present, of waiting patiently, and of never letting go. That night, as I looked out the window at the dark sky fading into dawn, I felt a profound sense of peace. I knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, moments of doubt, and tests of patience. But I also knew that the foundation was strong enough to rebuild, that the love between a father and his son could endure even the quietest betrayals, the subtlest manipulations, and the months of distance. And I promised myself, quietly and firmly, no matter what happens, I will always be here for him. Always. A few days later, I got a call from Daniel. His voice was hesitant at first, but there was a clarity in it I hadn't heard in months. "Dad, can we talk?" I agreed immediately, though I tried to sound calm. Inside, my chest felt tight with a mix of anticipation and fear. I didn't know what he would say, or if he had truly realized the depth of the distance that had grown between us. But I knew one thing. I needed this conversation as much as he did. When he arrived, Emma stayed in the car. Daniel and I sat on the porch, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the yard. We didn't speak immediately. I let the silence settle, letting him gather his thoughts. And when he finally began, his words cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about us. About the way things have changed." He paused, looking at his hands. "I let someone else influence how I saw you. And I didn't fight for us." I listened quietly, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the months lost. Relief that he had realized the truth. I understand now," he continued, "that some of the things I thought about you weren't real. They were ideas planted, ideas I didn't question." I reached over and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Daniel, it's okay. You didn't know. You were doing what you thought was right at the time. But I'm glad you see it now." He looked up, his eyes glistening. "I've missed you. Missed talking like we used to. I don't want to let it happen again." Neither of us spoke for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle. I thought about all the nights I had sat alone, wondering if I had failed as a father. And now, finally, I felt a sense of hope. "I don't want to lose you either," I whispered. "I never stopped loving you, and I never will. But I understand the need for your life, your marriage, your space. I just want to be part of it, in a way that works for both of us." He nodded slowly, a small smile forming. "I want that too. I want us to be close again, but properly, without letting anyone drive a wedge between us. We sat in silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. And for the first time in months, it felt like the air between us had cleared. Later, when he left, I watched him go with a quiet heart, feeling that fragile bridge between us growing stronger again. It would take time, patience, and care, but the path back to each other had begun. That night, as I sat alone, I reflected on what had happened. The pain, the distance, the influence, the misunderstandings, they had all tested us. But in the end, love had endured, patience had endured, and a father's quiet, unwavering presence had endured. I realized that family is never truly lost. It may drift, it may be tested, but love, when genuine, finds a way back. I whispered softly to the empty room, "We'll be okay, Daniel. We'll be okay." And somewhere, I believed he could hear me. The following weeks were quieter, but in a different way now. It wasn't the heavy silence of distance or mistrust. It was a gentle, deliberate quiet, a space that allowed understanding and patience to grow. Daniel began calling more often, not just brief messages, but real conversations. Sometimes it was about work, sometimes about memories we shared, and sometimes about his hopes and fears. One evening, he came over with Emma again. This time, she smiled genuinely, and I noticed a softness I hadn't seen before. There was no tension in her presence, no edge in her voice. Daniel seemed lighter, freer, and I realized that, slowly, the walls that had separated us were beginning to crumble. We sat in the living room, talking about nothing and everything at the same time. I watched him, remembering the boy who had once sat on my lap, telling me about his day at school. And in that moment, I understood something profound. A relationship can survive misunderstanding, manipulation, even months of distance, if both hearts are willing to remember what truly matters. Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand gently. "Dad, I'm sorry for letting things go this far," he said. "I didn't see clearly, and I let fear guide me instead of trusting you." I smiled softly, holding back a rush of tears. "It's okay, Daniel. We've both learned a lot. What matters is that we're here now. That's what counts." He looked at me, eyes full of gratitude and relief. "I've realized something," he said quietly. "No one can replace a father. No matter what I'm told, no matter what I'm influenced by, I'll always need you." Hearing those words, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The months of pain, the long nights of doubt and worry, seemed to fade. I understood then that love, even when tested, endures. That patience, consistency, and quiet care can restore what was broken. Emma watched us quietly. After a moment, she said softly, "I see now. You've always been there for him, and I understand why he needs you in his life." Her words were simple, but they carried acknowledgement and respect, and in that acknowledgement, I felt another barrier dissolve. We talked late into the evening. No arguments, no blame, no accusations. Just honesty, understanding, and the warmth of a family reconnecting. And by the time Daniel and Emma left, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in months. A sense that the bridge between us was not only repaired, but strengthened. That night, I sat alone in the living room, reflecting. The journey had been painful, yes, but it taught me something invaluable. Family is not about perfection. It is about presence, patience, and unwavering love. It is about holding on, even when it seems impossible, and trusting that love can guide people back to each other. I whispered to the quiet house, softly, almost as a promise. "I will always be here, Daniel. No matter what, I will always be here." And in my heart, I knew he could feel it. Because love, true love, always finds its way back. In the days and weeks that followed, our home slowly regained a warmth I had feared lost forever. Daniel and I began spending more time together again. Not in dramatic gestures, not in rushed or forced conversations, but in quiet, steady ways that reminded me of the bond we had shared all his life. We cooked meals together. We fixed things around the house. We shared stories and memories, sometimes laughing, sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. Emma, too, became a part of these moments, not as an intruder or someone dividing us, but as someone who had learned to respect the space and the love that existed between a father and his son. Over time, the tension she had once carried softened into mutual understanding. She saw that my presence in Daniel's life was not a threat, but a foundation, a constant, unshakable part of who he was. One evening, after a long day of small projects and shared laughter, Daniel and I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. He looked over at me, his expression calm, and said, "Dad, I don't think I ever realized just how much I needed you. I was so focused on trying to protect myself, trying to do what felt right, that I forgot the one person who had always been there for me." I felt a lump in my throat, and I reached over to place my hand on his. "Daniel, you never needed to forget. I was always here. I am always here. And I always will be." He smiled, that familiar warmth returning to his eyes. "I see that now, and I'm grateful. I really am." We sat quietly, the kind of quiet that is comfortable, full of understanding and love. I realized in that moment that reconciliation doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it comes in the patient rebuilding of trust, in the quiet affirmation that love endures, no matter how far it seems to drift. Later that night, after they had gone home, I sat alone in my living room, reflecting. The journey had been painful. Months of distance, misunderstanding, and subtle manipulation had tested us all. But in the end, patience, honesty, and unwavering love had guided us back to each other. I thought about the lessons this had taught me. That relationships are delicate, and influence can be powerful, but the bonds built through years of love cannot be broken so easily. That being present, even in silence, can be more meaningful than words. That forgiveness is not a single act, but a continuous choice. And most importantly, I realized that family is not about perfection. It is about presence. It is about showing up again and again, even when it hurts, even when it seems hopeless. It is about love that endures beyond misunderstanding, distance, and time. I whispered softly to the quiet house, almost as a prayer. "I will always be here for you, Daniel. Always. No matter what." And for the first time in months, I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. A quiet, steadfast assurance that despite the shadows we had walked through, the bond between a father and his son had survived, and it would continue to grow stronger every day. Because love, true love, is patient. Love is enduring. And love, when it is real, always finds its way back home. The days after that evening felt different. Not dramatic, not sudden, but quietly changed. The weight that had pressed on my chest for months seemed lighter, as if the air itself had shifted. I woke up with a small sense of hope that hadn't been there in a long time. It was a gentle feeling, like the first soft light of dawn creeping into a room. I spent that morning in my garden, tending to the flowers and vegetables I had almost neglected during the months of tension. Each small task, pulling weeds, watering the soil, pruning leaves, felt symbolic in some way. Care, patience, and attention could nurture life, and perhaps, just perhaps, it could nurture relationships too. I thought about Daniel, about the bridge we had rebuilt, and about how fragile yet resilient love could be. I realized that the struggle had changed me. The pain, the distance, the influence that had driven a wedge between us, it had forced me to look inward, to examine my own heart. I saw my own pride, my own fears, the ways I had allowed doubt to creep in. And I understood that reconciliation wasn't just about my son seeing the truth. It was about me being the father I always wanted to be, even when circumstances were beyond my control. That afternoon, I found myself sorting through old letters and mementos. There were notes Daniel had written to me when he was a boy, drawings he had made, small gifts he had given me over the years. I held each one carefully, remembering the joy, the innocence, and the trust we had shared. I realized that no matter how far he had drifted, those memories remained, etched in both our hearts. They were a reminder of who we were, and a guide for who we could still become. Later that evening, I prepared a simple dinner, just for myself. The house was quiet, but it felt alive in a new way. The silence no longer carried loneliness. It carried reflection, gratitude, and a sense of peace. I poured a glass of tea and sat by the window, watching the fading light turn to dusk. And as I sat there, I whispered softly to myself, "We are still here. We are still a family. And that matters more than anything else." A few days later, Daniel called. The sound of his voice felt familiar, warm, and reassuring. "Dad, I was thinking," he said, "maybe we could start a new tradition. Something just for us. No pressure, no expectations, just time together." I smiled. the warmth of his words filling me from chest to fingertips. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." We began to plan simple outings, weekend breakfasts, walks in the park, small projects around the house. Nothing extravagant, nothing forced. But each small moment became a building block, a reaffirmation of our bond. And with every shared laugh, every quiet conversation, every moment of presence, I felt the distance dissolve a little more. I began to understand something essential about love and family. That true connection is not maintained by constant contact alone, nor by words alone, nor by grand gestures. It is maintained by presence, patience, and unwavering care, even in silence. It is about showing up in the ways that matter most, even when life is difficult, even when misunderstandings linger. And in this quiet, reflective space, I finally allowed myself to feel gratitude. Gratitude for my son. Gratitude for the patience I had found within myself. Gratitude for the lessons learned through pain and distance. And even gratitude for the challenges, because they had taught me that love can endure, even when it feels threatened, even when the road seems impossible. I realized that every parent fears losing a child, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, in the subtle spaces of life where influence and misunderstanding can grow. And I also realized that while fear is inevitable, hope is a choice. And so is love. That night, I sat alone again, looking out at the stars. I whispered to the sky, softly, "I will always be here. I will never stop loving him. And no matter what, we will find our way back to each other." And for the first time in what felt like years, I truly believed it. In the weeks that followed, our interactions became steadier, more natural. Daniel would come over without warning sometimes, and I began to look forward to those unplanned visits with a quiet anticipation. We didn't talk about the past unless it came up naturally. Instead, we focused on small things, fixing a leaky faucet, planting flowers in the garden, or even just sitting on the porch and watching the evening settle over the neighborhood. I noticed subtle changes in him. His voice, once tense with caution, began to relax. His eyes, which had held a quiet wariness, now held traces of trust and comfort. And though he was still an adult, independent and busy with his own life, the closeness we shared began to return, piece by piece. One morning, I found him in the kitchen, quietly helping me wash the dishes. I hadn't asked him to stay, hadn't insisted, but he had chosen to be there. The gesture was small, ordinary, yet it carried immense meaning. I realized that the foundation of our relationship was being rebuilt not through grand acts, but through everyday presence. I also noticed Emma's change. She began to show a subtle respect for the bond Daniel and I shared. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, almost imperceptible at first. But over time, she stopped attempting to influence him subtly and instead allowed him the freedom to reconnect with me. There was still tension sometimes, but it was replaced gradually by understanding. One evening, Daniel and I went for a long walk around the neighborhood. We didn't speak much at first, letting the rhythm of our steps carry the conversation. Then, quietly, he said, "Dad, I've been thinking about everything, about how things got so complicated. I realize now that I was caught in the middle, and I didn't know how to deal with it. But I see now. I see that you were always on my side, even when I couldn't see it." I felt tears welling up, but I blinked them back. I simply nodded, allowing the silence to hold the weight of my emotions. "Daniel, it's okay. What matters is that you see it now, that you know it, and I'm proud of the man you are becoming." He looked at me for a long moment, and then, almost shyly, he said, "I missed this us." I didn't realize how much I missed it until it was almost gone. I reached over, squeezing his shoulder gently. "We're here now, and we'll keep being here. That's all that matters." As we walked back, I reflected on the journey we had taken. The months of tension, the misunderstandings, the subtle influence of someone else. All of it had tested us, but it had also revealed something essential, that love, patience, and presence can overcome even the quietest distance. I realized that relationships are not just about proximity. They are about trust, understanding, and the willingness to be patient. They are about showing up, even when the path is difficult, even when there's uncertainty. And they are about the quiet acknowledgement that mistakes can happen, but forgiveness and consistent care can restore what was lost. That night, I sat by the window, looking out at the stars. The house was quiet, but it felt alive in a new way. The silence was no longer heavy. It was filled with possibility. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "We're okay, Daniel. We'll be okay. And no matter what, I will always be here for you." And in my heart, I truly believed it. In the months that followed, our home slowly regained its warmth. Daniel began to spend more time visiting, sometimes with Emma, sometimes alone. These moments were simple, ordinary, yet profoundly meaningful. We didn't need grand gestures or long, emotional speeches. The bond between us was being rebuilt quietly, patiently, through shared experiences and presence. One Saturday morning, Daniel and I worked together in the garden. I handed him the trowel, and he smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. "I forgot how relaxing this is," he said. "It reminds me of when I was a kid, helping you plant the tomatoes." I laughed softly. "And you kept insisting the sunflowers were too big for their own good." He chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that filled the air. I felt a small, profound joy, realizing that these simple interactions were reconnecting us in ways words never could. Later, we sat on the porch, drinking tea. The sun was beginning to dip, casting a golden light over the yard. Daniel spoke about his work, his life, and even his fears. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that he was speaking openly, honestly, without hesitation or fear of judgment. Emma watched quietly, occasionally joining the conversation. I noticed a subtle change in her demeanor as well. The edge she once carried was gone, replaced by something more reflective, more respectful. I realized that the shift in our relationship had influenced her too, not by confrontation, but by the patience and love I had continued to show. One evening, as we sat quietly after dinner, Daniel looked at me, his eyes thoughtful. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he said. "I realize now that sometimes I let things get to me that I shouldn't have, but I also realize how important it is to have you in my life. You've always been there, even when I didn't notice." I reached over and placed my hand on his. "Daniel, I never stopped being here, and I never will be. Life will throw challenges at us, misunderstandings will happen, but love, real love, endures." He smiled, and for a moment, we sat together in quiet understanding. I thought back to the months of tension, the distance, and the pain, and I understood that all of it had brought us here, to a place where our bond was stronger, more conscious, and more resilient than ever before. I realized then that relationships are fragile, yes, but they are also incredibly resilient. They are strengthened not by perfection, but by patience, forgiveness, and consistent care. And even when external influences try to pull people apart, the foundation built by years of love can withstand almost anything. That night, I sat alone by the window, the quiet house around me, reflecting on everything we had gone through. I whispered softly to the empty room, "We will always find our way back. I will always be here for you, Daniel. Always." And I believed it fully, because love, when true, is patient. Love endures, and love always finds its way home. Weeks turned into months, and the quiet healing continued. Daniel and I found a rhythm again, one built on understanding rather than obligation, presence rather than words. We didn't force moments, and we didn't rush. We simply allowed our connection to grow naturally, strengthened by patience and honesty. One afternoon, Daniel came over with Emma. We sat in the living room, sunlight spilling across the carpet. He handed me a small notebook he had been keeping, a journal of thoughts, reflections, and moments he wanted to share with me. "I started writing this a while ago," he said softly. "I guess I wanted to find my own way to tell you everything I've been feeling." I opened the notebook carefully. Inside were pages filled with his reflections, memories, regrets, and realizations. He had chronicled the distance, the misunderstandings, and the influence that had swayed him, but he had also written about his love, his longing to reconnect, and his gratitude for my patience. I felt a lump in my throat. "Daniel, this means more to me than I can say," I whispered. He smiled quietly. "I wanted you to know. I've learned a lot about myself, about life, and about family, and I don't want to take any of it for granted." I realized then that the journey we had taken, the months of distance, pain, and quiet suffering, had shaped both of us. It had tested the strength of our bond, but it had also revealed the depth of love and resilience within it. Emma nodded, quietly supportive. "I understand now," she said. "I see the bond you two share, and I respect it. I want to be part of it without interfering. I felt a wave of relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real, I knew, was far more important than perfect. That evening, after they had left, I sat by the window, reflecting on everything we had been through. I thought about the lessons life had taught me. That family can endure distance and misunderstandings, but it requires patience, love, and unwavering presence. That influence, however subtle, can shape perceptions, but honesty and trust can restore clarity. That reconciliation is not always dramatic. It is often quiet, steady, and gradual. And that love, when true, never truly fades. It waits. It endures. It finds its way back. I whispered softly to the empty room, almost as a vow. I will always be here, Daniel. No matter what. Always. And in that quiet moment, I felt a sense of peace. A sense that, despite the challenges, despite the misunderstandings, despite the months of distance, our bond had endured. Stronger now, perhaps, than it ever had been. Because life will test us. People will try to pull us apart. Pain and influence will challenge us. But the love between a father and his son, when nurtured with patience and understanding, can survive anything. And I realized the final, quiet truth. Family is never lost if you hold on with love, patience, and unwavering presence. I closed my eyes, letting that truth settle deep in my heart. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt wholly at peace, knowing that no matter what the future held, the bond between me and my son was unbreakable, enduring, and eternal.